The Galactic Confederation had existed for millennia, a sprawling bureaucratic entity that somehow managed to keep thousands of species from killing each other, most of the time. Its massive central hall, with ceilings that soared hundreds of meters high to accommodate delegates of all sizes, currently buzzed with the usual pre-meeting chatter. Representatives from across the galaxy floated, crawled, slithered, or walked to their designated sections, careful to follow the elaborately marked pathways designed to prevent accidental territorial violations. Ambassador Jacob Rivers was late. Again, he jogged through the eastern entrance, his formal Earth diplomatic uniform slightly rumpled, and raised a hand in apology to the AX sentry who wiggled its sensory appendages in disapproval. Sorry, Rivers called out, smiling broadly at the various ambassadors who turned to stare. Most responded with what passed for frowns among their species. In a hall where everyone moved with deliberate, dignified slowness, a pace established over centuries of tradition, Rivers' casual jog was practically sacrilege. He slipped into the human delegation's modest seating area, nodding at his superior, Secretary General Martina Chun, who merely closed her eyes briefly in resignation. "You're late to the most important Security Council meeting of the year," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Again, elevator malfunction," Rivers whispered back. "Something about accommodating Rashka digestive requirements." The Secretary General didn't bother responding. It was always something with Rivers. In the 3 Earth Standard years he'd served as junior ambassador, he'd managed to accidentally insult 4 species through misinterpreted hand gestures, cause a minor diplomatic incident by bringing coffee into a meeting, apparently. Its aroma was hallucinogenic to the Vril, and yet somehow also negotiate 3 trade agreements that had been stalled for decades. The central speaker, a Muvarian with translucent skin that pulsed with light patterns conveying secondary emotional context, floated to the center platform. The 4,327 Security Council session will now commence, the central speaker announced, its voice resonating perfectly throughout the chamber thanks to both natural Muvarian abilities and sophisticated acoustics. First order, border dispute resolution in the Cygnus arm. Rivers settled in, attempting to look attentive while discreetly checking messages on his neural interface. The border dispute had been ongoing for 3 centuries. Another hour of debate wouldn't change much. His attention was jolted back to the present when he heard the words human expansion. Must address the unprecedented rate at which humans are establishing outposts, came the gravelly voice of Ambassador Grzak, the imposing representative of the Xeric Dominion. Rivers straightened in his seat. The Xeric were known throughout the Confederation for their hunting prowess and territorial conquests. Physically impressive, they stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, with powerful limbs and sensory adaptations that made them apex predators on their homeworld. Their leathery skin bore natural patterns that resembled battle armor, and their eyes, 4 of them, positioned for perfect panoramic vision, gleamed with an unnerving intelligence. Grzak continued, his translator rendering his complex throat sounds into standard galactic. Humans have been members of this confederation for less than 1 standard century, yet they've been granted expansion rights that took other species millennia to earn. Their technological development rate is concerning, their behavioral patterns erratic. They show little respect for established protocols. Rivers noticed the Secretary General typing a response on her interface, likely preparing a measured diplomatic rebuttal. Before she could transmit it to the central speaker, Rivers stood up. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. One simply did not stand unless formally recognized by the central speaker. The Muvarian's skin flashed patterns of surprise and annoyance. "The Council recognizes Ambassador Rivers of Earth," the central speaker announced, sounding distinctly displeased. "Thank you, central speaker," Rivers said, bowing slightly. "I merely wish to address the concerns raised by the esteemed Ambassador Grzak." The Xeric ambassador's 4 eyes focused on Rivers with predatory intensity. "Ambassador Grzak mentions our species' disregard for protocols," Rivers continued, smiling pleasantly. "I admit, we can be impatient with processes that take centuries. We're still adapting to Confederation timescales. Where I come from, Waiting 300 years to resolve a border dispute would mean everyone involved would be long dead before reaching a conclusion. Murmurs spread through the chamber, some amused, others offended. However, Rivers pressed on. I would argue that our efficiency isn't disrespect. It's simply how we've survived. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us at every turn, much like the Honorable Xeric. The difference is we didn't become apex predators through physical adaptation. We had to improvise. Grzak made a sound that didn't need translation to be recognized as derision. Improvisation is not a substitute for strength or proper procedure. Humans are elevated beyond their natural place in the cosmic hierarchy. The chamber grew quiet. Everyone recognized the increasing tension between the human and Xeric delegates. This wasn't just policy disagreement. It was veering into something more primal. Rivers merely smiled. I respect the ambassador's perspective. We humans are indeed physically unimpressive by many standards. No natural armor, modest sensory capabilities, limited strength. But perhaps that's why we value efficiency and adaptability. Grzak's posture shifted subtly, becoming more aggressive. Words. Humans hide behind words and machines. I question whether your species deserves the status you've been granted. The central speaker's skin flashed warning patterns. This line of discourse is becoming unproductive. I propose Krat, Grzak suddenly announced. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations. Even species known for stoicism reacted visibly. The central speaker's skin went almost completely dark, the Muvarian equivalent of stunned silence. Rivers looked around, confused. The human delegates exchanged equally bewildered glances. Whatever Krat was, it clearly held significant meaning to everyone except the humans. Secretary General Chen activated her interface, frantically searching the diplomatic database. Her face paled as she read the results. Rivers, she whispered urgently, decline immediately. Krat is an ancient ritual challenge, a formalized hunt. Grzak is challenging you to be hunted. Rivers blinked slowly, processing this information while the chamber remained in uproar. The central speaker was attempting to restore order. Order. The council will have order. The Muvarian skin pulsed with authoritative patterns. Ambassador Grzak, the ritual of Krat has not been invoked in a Security Council for 743 standard years. Are you certain this is your intention? I am, Grzak replied, his posture unwavering. The human speaks of adaptation and survival. Let us see these qualities demonstrated, not merely claimed. All eyes turned to Rivers, who stood perfectly still, his diplomatic training temporarily overwhelmed by the situation. The database information continued scrolling across his neural interface. Krat, an ancient ritual practiced by several predatory species, formalized within Confederation law as a form of ceremonial challenge. The hunted party receives a head start, then must evade capture for a predetermined time. You just agreed to? Xeric are evolution-perfected hunters. They can track prey across vacuum by residual electromagnetic signatures. Their endurance is 3 times that of a human's. Rivers maintained his inexplicable smile. Madam Secretary, with all due respect, this is exactly what Earth needs. A dead ambassador and a humiliated species? Explain how that helps us. The Confederation sees us as upstarts who don't belong at the adults' table, Rivers said, his voice suddenly serious. Technical innovation isn't enough to earn their respect. They've seen species rise and fall on technology alone. They respect survival. Adaptation. Grzak has inadvertently given us an opportunity to demonstrate something fundamental about humanity. And what's that? Chen asked, still seething. Rivers' smile returned, but it was different now. Less diplomatic, more primal. That we're not just clever apes who got lucky with opposable thumbs, he said. We're the most terrifying predators our planet ever produced. Following the council session, Rivers found himself in a secure briefing room with Secretary General Chun and Dr. Amara Okafor, the delegation's xenobiological expert. The doctor, a tall woman with close-crop hair who had studied predatory species across 12 star systems, did not look optimistic. "This is suicide, Jacob," Okafor said bluntly, projecting xeric physiological data onto the room's holographic display. "Look at these specifications. Ambient temperature vision, olfactory receptors that can detect a single molecule in a billion, musculature density 3 times human standard. They evolved to hunt creatures that make Earth's apex predators look like puppies." Rivers nodded, studying the displays. "And their weaknesses?" Okafor laughed humorlessly. "Weaknesses? Their only weakness is that they're not actually immortal. Their hunting style is explosive, intense bursts of speed and strength. On their home planet, they evolved to chase down prey in short, decisive pursuits." "Short pursuits," Rivers repeated thoughtfully. "So they're sprinters, not marathoners." "In a manner of speaking, yes. But their sprint would exhaust most humans in minutes." Rivers began pacing the room. "What about thermoregulation? How do they cool themselves?" "Surface heat exchange through their epidermis," Okafor replied, looking curious about the line of questioning. "Similar to many reptilian species, though they're not reptiles by our classification. They need to stop periodically if they overheat." "Why? And their tracking capabilities? You mentioned they can detect electromagnetic signatures. Among other things, their sensory package is extraordinary. They can follow scent trails days old, detect thermal residue from a footprint hours after it's made, and their vision spectrum extends well beyond human range in both directions." Rivers stopped pacing, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Doctor, I need a complete rundown on the topography of Neutral Territory 12, and I need to know what I'm allowed to bring with me." Secretary General Chun, who had been silently fuming until now, stepped forward. "Rivers, I'm ordering you to withdraw from this challenge. As your superior, I cannot allow." "Madam Secretary," Rivers interrupted gently, "with all due respect, the challenge has been formally recorded. Withdrawal now would confirm every negative stereotype the Confederation holds about humanity. We'd be seen as weak, cowardly, and unworthy of our current standing." "Better that than dead," Chun snapped. "I'm not going to die," Rivers assured her. "In fact, I think I'm going to give the Confederation something they'll never forget." Chun stared at him, clearly torn between her diplomatic responsibilities and her concern for a colleague. Finally, she sighed. "You have until departure to prepare. Whatever you need, within reason and the ritual's constraints, you'll have. But Rivers, if you survive this, we're going to have a very long talk about protocol." Rivers grinned. "Looking forward to it, Madam Secretary." The briefing continued with Dr. Okafor providing detailed information about Neutral Territory 12. The planet had been terraformed centuries ago, specifically for diplomatic contests and rituals, featuring a variety of environments from dense forests to deserts, mountains to swamps, all compressed into relatively small geographical areas. The standard survival pack you're allowed includes basic nutrition, water purification, minimal shelter components, and an emergency beacon that will end the challenge if activated, Okafor explained. No weapons, no advanced technology, nothing that could be considered an unfair advantage. "What about modifications to the standard pack contents?" Rivers asked. "Substitutions rather than additions?" "Possibly acceptable, depending on what you have in mind," Okafor replied. Rivers started listing items, specialized scent masking compounds, thermal dampening fabrics, sound mimicking devices, and several packets of what he described only as natural supplements. "Most of these should be allowable," Okafor said after consulting the regulations. "They're not weapons or advanced technology, just clever applications of basic principles." "Perfect," Rivers said. "And what about my clothing? Any restrictions there?" "Standard environmental protection, nothing more." "Why?" "I'll need the most moisture-wicking fabrics we have, and the best long-distance running shoes Earth has produced." Dr. Okafor's eyes widened slightly. "You're not planning to outrun a xeric?" "Not exactly," Rivers replied. "But I'm planning to run. A lot." While preparations continued, word of the challenge spread throughout the Confederation. For many species, the upcoming Krat was the most exciting event in centuries. Diplomatic proceedings were always carefully managed, predictable, and frankly, boring. An ancient ritual hunt between an upstart human and a Xeric champion was unprecedented entertainment. The betting pools expanded exponentially. While the odds still heavily favored Grizak, a small but growing number of bettors were placing wagers on the human. Not because they believed he could win, but because the payouts would be extraordinary if he somehow did. Grizak, meanwhile, was conducting his own preparations. Unlike Rivers, he required little special equipment. His natural abilities were more than sufficient for hunting a human. Still, he studied human physiology reports, analyzed Rivers' known habits and behaviors, and mentally mapped the most likely evasion strategies a human might employ. What confused him was the human's apparent confidence. By all accounts, Rivers should have been terrified, yet reports indicated he seemed almost eager for the challenge. This puzzled Grizak. Either the human was concealing his fear well, or he knew something the Xeric did not. The latter possibility was concerning enough that Grizak consulted historical records of human combat tactics. What he found was interesting, but not particularly worrying. Humans had a history of using terrain and unconventional strategies to overcome physically superior opponents. But without weapons or technology, what could one soft, slow human possibly do against a Xeric hunter? The morning of the challenge arrived. Rivers and Grizak were transported separately to Neutral Territory 12, a small world with an artificially maintained ecosystem specifically designed for ceremonial contests. Rivers would be deployed first, given his 1-hour head start, while Grizak would wait at the control station. As Rivers prepared to enter the transport chamber, Secretary General Chun approached him one last time. "This is still madness," she said quietly. "Probably," Rivers agreed, checking his pack. "But necessary madness. You have a plan beyond just running for your life?" Rivers smiled. "Madam Secretary, running for my life is exactly the plan. Just not in the way everyone expects." He stepped into the chamber. "See you tomorrow. I'll try not to cause another diplomatic incident." Before she could respond, the transport activated, and Jacob Rivers vanished in a shimmer of displaced air. The landscape that materialized around Rivers was lush and humid, a dense, tropical forest with towering vegetation reminiscent of Earth's rainforests, though the flora was a composite of species from dozens of worlds. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns, and the air smelled rich with organic compounds. Instead of immediately dashing for cover as most hunted creatures would, Rivers took a moment to orient himself. He checked his position on the rudimentary map he'd been provided, confirmed his compass was functioning, and then did something unexpected. He began stretching. Methodically, he worked through a series of exercises familiar to any marathon runner, loosening his hamstrings, rotating his ankles, stretching his calves and quads. Only after completing this ritual did he begin to move, and even then, his pace was measured, a steady jog rather than a panic sprint. Rivers had studied the terrain maps extensively. Neutral Territory 12 was designed as a compressed showcase of diverse environments, with transitions that would be geologically impossible on a natural world. Within 100 kilometers, the landscape shifted from tropical forest to rocky highlands, from scorching desert to boggy wetlands. Each environment presented different challenges for both hunter and hunted. His strategy was simple in concept, though demanding in execution. He would lead Grizak on a carefully planned route through the most physically taxing terrains, maintaining a pace that seemed tantalizingly catchable but would steadily drain the Xeric's energy reserves. An hour passed quickly. At the control station, Grizak prepared for deployment, his 4 eyes gleaming with anticipation. The Xeric had fasted for a day prior, an ancient hunting tradition that sharpened senses and heightened aggressive instincts. As the transport activated, he visualized the satisfaction of bringing the human before the Confederation, humbled and defeated. The moment Grizak materialized in the forest, his hunting adaptations engaged. His skin receptors immediately analyzed the ambient temperature, humidity, and air composition. His nostrils flared, sampling the foreign yet identifiable scent of human sweat. Without hesitation, he began to move, his powerful legs carrying him through the undergrowth with surprising grace for his size. The trail was clear to his enhanced senses: broken twigs, compressed soil, disturbed insects, and the unmistakable chemical signature of a human male. The observers monitoring from the control station were impressed by the Zirich's immediate acquisition of River's trail. On their screens, Grisaka's progress was represented by a rapidly moving red indicator, while Rivers was shown in blue, currently maintaining a steady pace northeast. "The human is moving too slow," commented a Vril observer, its translator conveying the clicking speech pattern. "At current speeds, interception will occur within 27 minutes. "Agreed," replied a Muvarian analyst. "The human appears to be jogging at approximately 60% of maximum human sprint capacity. Either he doesn't understand the Zirich's speed, or he has accepted defeat." In the forest, Rivers heard the first signs of pursuit, the subtle shifting of vegetation that indicated something large was moving swiftly behind him. He checked his chronometer. 23 minutes since Grisaka's deployment. The Zirich was covering ground even faster than Rivers had anticipated. Time to implement Phase 1. Rivers increased his pace slightly, heading toward a stream he knew lay ahead. Upon reaching it, he waded upstream for several hundred meters, then emerged onto a rocky bank where he'd leave minimal scent trail. Here, he removed a packet from his belt and applied its contents to his skin and clothing, a compound specifically designed to temporarily mask human biochemical signatures. He continued moving, now angling toward a region of dense underbrush. Behind him, he could hear Grisaka's approach slow as the Zirich reached the stream. Rivers smiled grimly. The first obstacle was working. At the stream, Grisak paused, his sensory organs working overtime to reacquire the trail. The water had dispersed much of the human scent, but not all of it. After a moment's consideration, the Zirich followed the water upstream, noting the subtle disturbances in the current that suggested recent passage. When he emerged onto the rocky bank, however, the trail seemed to vanish. Grisak made a sound of frustration, a low, rumbling growl. This was unexpected. Humans weren't known for sophisticated anti-tracking techniques, and Rivers wasn't a military specialist, but a diplomat. After quartering the area methodically, Grisak picked up a faint trace leading into the underbrush. The scent was wrong somehow, muted, altered, but it was the only lead. He followed it, moving more cautiously now. In the control station, the observers noted this development with surprise. "The human has employed some kind of scent masking technique," the Vril observer noted. "Interesting strategy, though ultimately futile. Zirich tracking relies on multiple sensory inputs." "Indeed," agreed the Muvarian, "but has cost the hunter almost 15 minutes. Perhaps the human isn't completely unprepared, after all." Rivers maintained his steady pace through the underbrush, emerging eventually into a region of rising terrain. Ahead lay the first major geographical transition, from forest to rocky highlands. The path would become steeper, the footing less certain, the air thinner. Perfect. He checked his chronometer again. Nearly 45 minutes had passed since first contact. Behind him, he could hear Grisak crashing through the vegetation, having abandoned stealth for speed once he'd reacquired the trail. Rivers began the ascent into the highlands, his pace never faltering. Years of marathon training on Earth had prepared him for this sustained effort. His breathing remained controlled, his movements efficient. He didn't need to look back to know that Grisak was gaining. The sounds of pursuit were growing louder. Just as the forest began to thin, revealing the rocky slopes beyond, Rivers heard a triumphant roar directly behind him. He turned to see Grisak burst from the tree-line, all four eyes fixed on him with predatory intensity. "Nowhere to run. Human," the Zirich called out, his translator rendering the words in Standard Galactic. Rivers, instead of showing fear, grinned. "Who said anything about stopping?" He reached into his pack and threw something toward Grisak, a small pouch that burst upon impact, releasing a cloud of fine powder. The Zirich recoiled instinctively as the substance enveloped him. It wasn't harmful, merely disruptive, a mixture of compounds that temporarily overwhelmed his olfactory receptors with conflicting, intense scents. By the time Grizak recovered, Rivers had disappeared among the rocky outcroppings of the highlands. The Xeric snarled in frustration, but quickly resumed the chase, following the visible trail up the increasingly steep terrain. In the observation center, a new species joined the commentary, a Rashkar representative with extensive military experience. The human employs guerrilla tactics, the Rashkar noted, its gelatinous form rippling with interest. Each engagement is brief, designed not to win, but to delay and disorient. I've studied human military history. This is consistent with their approach to asymmetric warfare. But without weapons, what purpose does delay serve? Asked the Vril. The Xeric will recover and continue pursuit. The human merely postpones inevitable capture. The Rashkar's translator conveyed what might have been amusement. Perhaps, or perhaps there is more to human endurance than our biological profiles suggest. On the highlands, the chase continued. The terrain was challenging for both parties, but in different ways. For Rivers, the steep slopes and loose rocks demanded careful footing and greater energy expenditure. For Grizak, the elevation began to tax his thermoregulatory system, designed for the dense forests and plains of his homeworld. Twice more, the Xeric nearly caught Rivers. The first time, on a narrow ledge overlooking a sheer drop, Rivers evaded capture by dropping to a lower shelf, while Grizak was forced to check his momentum to avoid plunging over the edge. The second time, in a field of boulder formations, Rivers slipped through a gap too narrow for the Xeric's broader frame, forcing his pursuer to find an alternate route. Each near capture ended with Rivers not just escaping, but taunting the increasingly frustrated Xeric. Getting tired yet, Rivers called back after one particularly close encounter. We're not even halfway through the day. Grizak didn't waste breath responding, but internally he was beginning to question his initial assessment. The human wasn't running blindly. He was leading the chase, choosing the path. Why would prey dictate the terms of pursuit unless? The thought was disturbing enough that Grizak paused briefly, his four eyes scanning the path ahead. Was this a trap? Were there human allies waiting in ambush? But no, the rules of Krat were clear and binding. Rivers was alone, unarmed, and still objectively at a disadvantage. Reassured, Grizak resumed the chase, though with a greater sense of caution. The human's confidence remained puzzling, but it changed nothing. Eventually, Rivers would tire. Eventually, he would make a mistake, and Grizak would be there when he did. 3 hours into the hunt, the terrain changed again. The rocky highlands gave way to a barren expanse, the artificial desert region of Neutral Territory 12. Here, the heat was intense, the ground a mixture of hard-packed clay and shifting sand. Virtually no cover existed. Visibility stretched for kilometers in all directions. Rivers emerged onto this hostile plain without hesitation, maintaining the same measured pace he'd held since the beginning. Sweat soaked his moisture-wicking clothing, but his hydration discipline was strict. Small, regular sips from his water supply kept him functioning optimally. Grizak followed, initially pleased by the open terrain. No more hiding, no more slipping through narrow gaps or using obstacles for misdirection. The desert would be where he finally ran down his quarry. Yet as another hour passed, then another, something unexpected happened. The Xeric began to slow. His species' thermoregulation system, evolved for bursts of activity followed by recovery periods, was being pushed beyond its design parameters. The relentless sun of Neutral Territory 12 beat down, heating his leathery skin. Normally, he would find shade, allow his body temperature to equalize, then resume hunting. But there was no shade here, and stopping meant allowing Rivers to increase the distance between them. In the control station, betting odds were beginning to shift. While Grizak was still favored to win, the margin had narrowed considerably. The human strategy becomes clear, the Rashka observer noted. This is persistence hunting, an ancient human technique. They did not evolve to be the fastest or strongest predators on their world. They evolved to outlast. Surely the Xeric's superior physiology can overcome simple endurance, the Vril objected. Superior is contextual, the Rashka replied. Humans possess unusual thermoregulation efficiency. Their bodies are covered in specialized glands that secrete water to cool them, what they call sweating. It's remarkably effective for sustained activity in hot conditions. The Muvarian's skin flashed patterns of realization. And the Xeric, with their heat exchange epidermis, require periods of reduced activity to cool effectively. Precisely, confirmed the Rashka. The playing field is more level than it first appeared. On the desert plain, Rivers finally allowed himself to glance back. Grzak was still in pursuit, but noticeably slower, his movements less fluid. The distance between them had increased to nearly a kilometer. Good. Phase 2 was working. The next transition lay ahead, from desert to wetlands. Rivers had been careful to time his crossing of the desert to ensure maximum heat exposure for his pursuer. Now, as the ground began to soften underfoot, indicating the approach of the swamp region, he adjusted his route to lead through the most treacherous parts of the coming terrain. The wetlands of Neutral Territory 12 were a disorienting maze of shallow pools, deep mud pits, and patches of deceptively solid-looking ground that could swallow a careless traveler. Rivers had memorized the safest path, but even that required careful navigation. Behind him, Grzak entered the wetlands with growing frustration. The soft ground hampered his powerful strides, the mud clinging to his feet and lower limbs. Worse, the high humidity reduced the efficiency of his heat exchange system, leaving him still overheated from the desert crossing. For the first time, doubt crept into the Xeric's mind. The human showed no signs of faltering. If anything, Rivers' pace remained maddeningly consistent, neither sprinting ahead nor slowing from fatigue. It was as though he'd calibrated his speed precisely to stay just beyond Grzak's reach. Another hour passed as they traversed the wetlands. Twice, Grzak nearly lost his footing in particularly treacherous stretches. Once he sank thigh-deep into mud that appeared solid, requiring precious minutes to extract himself. All the while, Rivers moved ahead with the confident steps of someone following a memorized route. In the control station, the commentary had shifted dramatically. The wagering pools are approaching parity, reported the Vril, its translator conveying astonishment. Nearly half the observers now favor a human victory. The Xeric shows signs of significant physical stress, added the Muvarian. Core temperature elevated, coordination diminishing, estimated strength reserves at 60% of optimal. And the human? Asked the Rashka. Remarkably stable, the Muvarian replied. Vital signs indicate fatigue, but within sustainable parameters. His pace has slowed approximately 12% since the beginning, while the Xeric's has decreased by 31%. A remarkable demonstration of species adaptation, the Rashka observed. Perhaps we have underestimated these humans. As the day progressed, the terrain shifted once more from wetlands back to forest, though a different region than where they begun. This forest was older, darker, with massive trees creating a canopy that blocked much of the light. Rivers entered the shadowy woods knowing that this final phase would be crucial. The forest offered advantages to Grzak: cover for ambush, better conditions for his thermoregulation, terrain that favored bursts of speed between obstacles. But Rivers had planned for this too. He altered his path, no longer moving in a straight line, but weaving between the massive tree trunks, doubling back occasionally, creating a pattern designed to frustrate prediction. He deployed the last of his scent-masking compounds and used his sound-mimicking device to create false trails. Grzak, upon entering the forest, initially felt his confidence return. This was familiar territory, similar to his home environment. The shade allowed his body temperature to begin normalizing, and his senses, though still somewhat dulled from the prolonged exertion, could function more effectively in these conditions. Yet Rivers proved even more elusive here than in the open. The human's trail would appear clear, then suddenly vanish. Sounds of movement came from multiple directions simultaneously. Scent trails led nowhere. For the first time in his life, Grzak experienced what it was like to be the confused, disoriented prey rather than the assured predator. The realization was deeply unsettling. As the artificial day on neutral territory 12 began to wane, with only 2 hours remaining before the challenge's conclusion, the observers at the control station were transfixed. What had begun as an expected demonstration of Zirich's superiority had transformed into the most compelling Krat ritual in centuries. Remarkable, the Rashka commented. The human has not merely survived. He has dictated the terms of engagement throughout. This is not prey behavior. This is predatory. Explaining the betting shift, noted the Vril. Current odds now favor the human. Unprecedented in a Krat between species with such physical disparity. In the forest, the final confrontation was approaching. Rivers had been monitoring his chronometer. Carefully, with just over an hour remaining, he made a calculated decision. Rather than continuing his evasive pattern, he moved toward a small clearing he'd identified on his map. An open space surrounded by ancient trees where the forest floor was relatively flat and clear of obstacles. There he stopped. For the first time since the challenge began, Jacob Rivers stood perfectly still, breathing deeply but steadily, and waited. It didn't take long. Grzak, following one of the more persistent trails, emerged from the tree line opposite Rivers. The Zirich halted abruptly, all four eyes widening in surprise at finding his quarry standing in the open, making no attempt to flee. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply regarded each other across the clearing. The human diplomat, sweat-soaked but composed, and the Zirich hunter, mud-splattered and visibly fatigued. Finally, Grzak broke the silence. "Why don't you run?" he demanded, his translator struggling to convey the complex mix of emotions in his voice. Confusion, frustration, and a dawning respect. Rivers smiled. It wasn't the diplomatic smile he wore in council chambers, but something older, something primal, the smile of a predator. "Why would I chase you twice?" he replied. The words hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Grzak understood then, in a flash of clarity, what had happened. He hadn't been hunting the human. The human had been hunting him. "Impossible," Grzak growled, though his body betrayed his words. His powerful limbs trembled with exhaustion, his breathing labored. "You are prey. Humans are prey species." Rivers shook his head slowly. "That's where everyone gets us wrong. We didn't evolve as prey or predators in the traditional sense. We evolved as persistence hunters. We don't have claws or fangs or venom. We have something far more terrifying, endurance." Grzak took a step forward, determined to complete his hunt despite his fatigue. "The challenge is not over." "True," Rivers agreed. "You still have time to capture me. If you can." He spread his arms in invitation. "I'm right here." The Zirich gathered himself for one final burst of speed, launching across the clearing with impressive power despite his exhausted state. But Rivers, who had been conserving energy for precisely this moment, sidestepped with surprising agility. As Grzak stumbled past, Rivers continued the conversation as if they were merely having a diplomatic discussion. "On ancient Earth, my ancestors would chase prey animals for hours, sometimes days. Not because we were faster, we never were, but because we could keep going long after other animals collapsed from heat exhaustion." He circled around Grzak, who was trying to regain his balance. "We sweated when other creatures panted. We carried water and planned ahead when other predators relied on instinct. We weren't the strongest or the fastest, but we were the most patient." Grzak turned, trying to track Rivers' movement, but his normally precise coordination was compromised by fatigue. "You led me through the most challenging terrains deliberately." "Of course," Rivers replied. "Desert to overheat you, wetlands to sap your strength, varied elevations to tax different muscle groups. Basic persistence, hunting strategy, adapted for your specific physiology." The Zirich made another lunge, and again Rivers evaded, though not as easily this time. Both were tired, but Grzak was closer to his limit. "The Confederation thinks humans are reckless, impatient creatures," Rivers continued, circling again. "In some ways, we are. But they forget that patience is also part of our heritage. Before we had technology, before we had weapons, we had determination. We would follow our prey until it couldn't run anymore, until it surrendered to exhaustion. Grisaka's next attack was slower, more calculated, trying to anticipate River's movement. For a moment, it seemed he might succeed as his outstretched hand grazed the human shoulder. But Rivers twisted away at the last second, and the Xeric's momentum carried him forward into the trunk of one of the massive trees bordering the clearing. The impact wasn't particularly hard, but it was enough. Grizak slumped to the ground, his body finally reaching its physiological limits. He wasn't unconscious, but he lacked the strength to rise immediately. Rivers approached cautiously, kneeling near the fallen Xeric, but still out of reach. For what it's worth, you're the most formidable opponent I've ever faced. No human could match your strength or speed. But today wasn't about strength or speed. Grizaka's 4 eyes focused on Rivers with newfound respect, though his pride was clearly wounded. The challenge is yours. I cannot continue. As if on cue, a chime sounded from both their chronometers, indicating that the official observers had registered the outcome. The hunt was over. Rivers had survived. More than survived, he had reversed the roles and become the de facto hunter. Help will arrive soon, Rivers said, sitting down cross-legged on the forest floor. I'd offer you water, but I finished mine an hour ago. You would share resources with your adversary? Grizak asked, surprise evident even through his exhaustion. Rivers shrugged. The challenge is over. We're just diplomats again. He paused, then added with a smile. Besides, offering water to exhausted competitors is another human tradition. They sat in silence for several minutes, both recovering their strength, until the distinctive hum of the transport system announced the arrival of the official observers and medical team. In the control station, the final moments of the Krat had left the observers in stunned silence. The victory confirmation signals flashed across their monitors, but it took several seconds before anyone spoke. Unprecedented, the Muvarian finally said, its skin displaying patterns of astonishment. In all recorded Krat rituals, I can find no instance where the physically inferior party triumphed so decisively. The human strategy was illuminating, added the Rashka. Not evasion, but managed confrontation. He selected every battlefield, dictated every engagement. The diplomatic implications are significant, noted the Vril. This outcome will reshape perceptions of humans throughout the Confederation. As medical personnel tended to Grizak, other observers approached Rivers. The human diplomat accepted a water pouch gratefully, but waved off immediate medical attention. I'm fine, he insisted. Just tired. How is Ambassador Grizak? The Xeric will recover fully, replied a Muvarian medic. No permanent damage, merely extreme fatigue and mild dehydration. Rivers nodded, relieved. Good. This was never about causing harm. What was it about, Ambassador Rivers? Asked one of the official observers, a Vril whose translator conveyed genuine curiosity. Rivers considered the question as he drank. Understanding, he said finally. Sometimes words aren't enough. Sometimes you need to demonstrate. Demonstrate what, precisely? That humanity's place in the Confederation isn't a mistake or a charity, Rivers replied, his diplomatic demeanor returning now that the challenge was complete. We may not have the physical prowess of the Xeric or the sensory capabilities of the Vril or the longevity of the Muvarians, but we have our own strengths. Adaptability, endurance, determination. Today was just a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. The transport activated again, returning all parties to the Confederation's central facility. News of the outcome had spread rapidly throughout the diplomatic community. By the time Rivers emerged from the medical check, which he had eventually agreed to as a formality, the corridors were filled with representatives from dozens of species, all trying to appear dignified while obviously straining to catch a glimpse of the human who had turned a Krat ritual on its head. Secretary General Chun was waiting in the reception area, her expression an interesting mixture of relief, disbelief, and lingering irritation. You're alive, she observed dryly, and apparently uninjured. As promised, Rivers replied with a grin. Though I could use about 20 hours of sleep and possibly a new pair of legs. Your ridiculous gamble paid off, Chun continued, lowering her voice as they walked toward the human quarter. But don't think this means I approve of your methods. The diplomatic corps doesn't typically encourage its representatives to engage in prehistoric hunting rituals. With respect, Madam Secretary, that's exactly why it worked. No one expected it. The Confederation sees humans as technological upstarts, reliant on our machines and innovations. Today showed them something different, something older and more fundamental about our species. Chun sighed. The Council has called an emergency session for tomorrow. Ambassador Grzaka's superiors are concerned about the implications of today's outcome. I imagine they are, Rivers said. A senior Xeric diplomat being effectively hunted by a human challenges some deeply held assumptions. And you'll need to address those concerns without being smug or antagonistic, Chun warned. This isn't a schoolyard triumph, Rivers. It's a delicate diplomatic situation. I understand, Rivers assured her. Tomorrow I'll be the very model of humility and reconciliation. See that you are, Chun replied, but there was a hint of pride beneath her stern exterior. Get some rest. You've earned it, even if your methods give me gray hairs. The following day, Rivers entered the council chamber to a dramatically different reception than before. Where previously there had been thinly veiled disdain or indifference, now there was intense curiosity, grudging respect, and in some cases, unmistakable wariness. He took his seat among the human delegation, nodding politely to the representatives around him. Secretary General Chun gave him a warning look that clearly communicated, "Don't push your luck." The central speaker called the session to order, its skin displaying formal patterns. The council recognizes the completion of the Krat ritual between Ambassador Grzak of the Xeric Dominion and Ambassador Rivers of Earth. As recorded by official observers, Ambassador Rivers was declared victorious when Ambassador Grzak conceded the challenge. Murmurs spread through the chamber. The central speaker continued. The council has received a formal communication from the Xeric High Command regarding this outcome. Ambassador Grzak will address the assembly. All eyes turned to the Xeric delegation. Grzak, looking remarkably recovered though perhaps somewhat subdued, rose from his seat. Honorable representatives, the Xeric began, his translator conveying a formal tone. Yesterday, I initiated a Krat ritual against Ambassador Rivers of Earth. I did so, believing it would demonstrate the limitations of humanity's place within our Confederation. He paused, his four eyes scanning the chamber before settling on Rivers. I was mistaken, Grzak continued. The ritual did indeed provide clarity, but not as I anticipated. Ambassador Rivers displayed qualities that we have failed to recognize in humans. Physical adaptation different from our own. Tactical patience, strategic foresight. Another pause. Rivers could sense how difficult this was for the proud Xeric. The Xeric Dominion acknowledges the legitimate victory and the lesson it contains, Grzak concluded. We have underestimated humanity. We will not make this error again. With that, he sat down. The chamber remained silent for several seconds before the central speaker's skin pulsed with acknowledgement patterns. The council thanks Ambassador Grzak for his statement, the Muvarian said. Ambassador Rivers, do you wish to address the assembly? Rivers stood, feeling the weight of countless alien gazes. This was the moment Chun had warned him about, the opportunity to be either conciliatory or triumphant. He chose his words carefully. Honorable representatives of the Confederation, he began. Yesterday's events were never intended as a demonstration of superiority, but of difference. Each species represented in this chamber evolved unique adaptations to survive and thrive in their native environments. Humans are no exception. He looked directly at Grzak. Ambassador Grzak is an exceptional representative of a proud and capable species. In most ways, his physical capabilities far exceed my own. What yesterday illustrated was not that humans are better, but that we are different in ways that perhaps haven't been fully appreciated. Rivers glanced around the chamber. Humanity doesn't seek dominance within the Confederation. We seek understanding and cooperation. We bring our unique perspectives and adaptations to complement the incredible diversity already present in this body. If yesterday's demonstration helps facilitate that understanding, then it served its purpose. He sat down to a chamber filled with thoughtful silence. After a moment, the central speaker addressed the assembly again. The council acknowledges both statements. As is traditional following a formal crat, both parties have spoken and honor is satisfied. Let us proceed to the scheduled agenda. As the council returned to its regular business, Rivers noticed a subtle but significant difference in how the other representatives engaged with the human delegation. Questions were directed to them more frequently, their input solicited on matters where previously they had been overlooked. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming, but it was real, a shift in perception that might, in time, lead to a shift in status. Secretary General Chun leaned over slightly. "Nicely done," she whispered. "Though I'm still scheduling you for additional diplomatic protocol training when we return to Earth." Rivers smiled. "Fair enough." When the session concluded, Rivers was approached by several representatives who had previously shown little interest in human affairs. They asked pointed questions about human endurance capabilities, environmental adaptations, and historical hunting practices. Rivers answered candidly but diplomatically, aware that every response was being carefully evaluated. As the crowd thinned, Grzak approached. The Xeric moved with his usual power and grace, showing no lingering effects from the previous day's exertion. He stopped before Rivers, towering over the human, but no longer with the same air of superiority. "Ambassador," Grzak said simply. "Ambassador," Rivers replied with a respectful nod. "Our encounter has prompted much discussion among my people," the Xeric continued. "We have reviewed historical records of human persistence hunting. It is not unlike techniques used by ancient Xeric. Before our evolutionary adaptations favored speed over endurance. Different paths to similar outcomes," Rivers suggested. "The hallmark of convergent evolution." "Indeed," Grzak seemed to hesitate, then added, "the Xeric value strength and hunting prowess. Yesterday, you hunted me without me realizing I had become prey. This is worthy of respect." "As was your pursuit," Rivers replied. "Few could have maintained that pace across such varied terrain." The Xeric made a sound that his translator rendered as a short laugh. "You ensured the terrain was maximally challenging." "I worked with what was available," Rivers admitted with a smile. Grzak's posture shifted slightly, becoming less formal. "The next Security Council session will address expansion rights in the Orion Spur. Previously, the Xeric Dominion was prepared to oppose Earth's petition. And now?" Rivers asked, keeping his expression neutral despite the diplomatic implications. "Now, we will support it," Grzak stated. "Not from fear or obligation, but from recognition. Your species has earned the opportunity to demonstrate its capabilities further." Before Rivers could respond, the Xeric continued, "But do not mistake this for weakness, Ambassador. We will be watching Earth's expansion carefully. Yesterday's lesson goes both ways. We now better understand what humans are capable of." "As it should be," Rivers agreed. "Mutual respect based on mutual understanding." With a final acknowledging gesture, Grzak departed, leaving Rivers to contemplate the unexpected diplomatic victory his physical ordeal had secured. Later that evening, Rivers returned to his quarters in the Human Embassy section. His muscles ached from the previous day's exertion, and the diplomatic maneuvering of the council session had taxed his mental reserves equally. He removed his formal uniform and examined his feet, blistered and raw despite the advanced footwear. "Worth it," he murmured to himself as he applied a healing compound. His communication terminal chimed with an incoming message from Earth Command. The stern face of Admiral Helena Vasquez, Earth's military liaison to the Confederation, appeared on screen. "Ambassador Rivers," she greeted him. "Reports of your unconventional diplomatic approach have reached Earth. The Joint Chiefs are quite interested in your demonstration of, shall we say, terrestrial capabilities." Rivers suppressed a groan. "Admiral," It was a specific response to a specific challenge. I'm not suggesting we turn the diplomatic corps into a persistence hunting training program. Nevertheless, Vasquez continued with a hint of a smile, your actions have potentially strategic implications. The perception of humanity among certain Confederation species has been measurably altered. Earth Command requests a full debriefing upon your return. Of course, Admiral, Rivers replied. Though I should warn you, the story sounds more impressive than it felt at the time. Mostly it was just a very long, very uncomfortable run. Sometimes the most effective demonstrations are the simplest, Vasquez observed. Good work, Ambassador. Unorthodox, but effective. Vasquez out. As the screen went dark, Rivers sank back into his chair. From a simple diplomatic post to an interspecies challenge to a potentially significant shift in humanity's Confederation standing. All because he decided to accept, rather than decline, a ritual hunt. His terminal chimed again, this time with a text message from Secretary General Chun. Security Council just approved Earth's expansion petition unanimously. Whatever you did, keep doing it. But please find less physically dangerous methods in the future. Rivers laughed, then winced as his sore muscles protested. Yesterday's ordeal had been a calculated risk, leveraging humanity's unique adaptations against a physically superior opponent. But the real challenge would be what came next, navigating the complex political aftermath of a diplomatic paradigm shift. He thought back to that moment in the forest clearing, when Grizak had asked why he didn't run, and his own response, why would I chase you twice? The question hadn't just been about the physical hunt, but about humanity's place in the cosmos. They'd spent too long running, from more established species, from their own limitations, from the perception of being newcomers unworthy of equal standing. Perhaps now, they could stop running and start walking their own path through the stars, alongside rather than behind the other members of the Confederation. Rivers smiled as he drifted towards sleep. One long run through an artificial wilderness had changed perceptions that centuries of formal diplomacy couldn't touch. Sometimes the oldest solutions were still the best.